maximum security, maximum power. Inmates who never stop controlling crime. True crime documentary. It was supposed to be the safest place in the world for crime bosses, a fortress of concrete, razor wire, and armed guards deep inside a maximum security prison. But inside one of Georgia's toughest lockups, inmates were quietly building a drug empire and directing it from behind bars. In one jaw-dropping move, they even used drones to smuggle in contraband, all coordinated by prisoners locked up for life. The prosecutors in a massive 2024 sting called it a sophisticated multi-state criminal enterprise run entirely from inside the prison, AJC. Imagine that, men behind bars with no freedom to walk outside, making orders for huge drug shipments, managing street-level dealers, bribing corrupt guards, and coordinating it all through their cell walls. The level of planning and control left investigators stunned. How could men locked in isolation still call the shots on drug deals that reached far beyond the prison yard? That question haunted law enforcement, and it still hasn't gone away. At the heart of the operation was a gang leader serving a life sentence, Joseph Lil Joe Broxton. From a Georgia state prison, he ran a drug trafficking network with the help of other inmates and civilians outside, AJC. Another key figure was Cadentius Thomas, who allegedly used connections inside prison to recruit correctional officers into the scheme. Those officers smuggled in not only methamphetamine and fentanyl, but also powerful cell phones and even drug-soaked paper, all part of a deep, layered conspiracy, AJC. And it wasn't just a small-time hustle. Over nearly a decade, investigators documented 28 major cases tied to more than 24 Georgia prisons, each involving inmates secretly coordinating massive drug shipments, AJC. Some of these operations relied on drone smuggling, where couriers on the outside flew packages of drugs and phones into prison airspace, dropping them inside walls or courtyards, AJC. The more investigators dug in, the more alarming the picture became. These weren't isolated incidents. The scale, the sophistication, and the involvement of staff made it clear these inmates weren't just surviving in prison, they were thriving. They had built a criminal enterprise from inside a building meant to stop them.
Yet for all the power they wielded, life inside was brutal. Prison wasn't a cozy headquarters. It was built of bunk beds, routine fights, strict schedules, and constant danger. Every day, these inmates had to navigate shifting alliances, maintain loyalty with their outside contacts, and even pay off guards just to keep their operation running. Some paid with money, others with promises. Some guards turned a blind eye, others risked everything. At night, in the shadows of cell blocks, coded messages were written. Inmates passed notes. Others used contraband phones to stay in contact. There was no teleportation, just ruthless discipline, hidden networks, and the will to stay in control. Then came the crackdown. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, along with federal and local law enforcement, launched Operation Night Drop and Operation Skyhawk, targeting these very smuggling rings. AJC, over months of investigations, they traced back phone numbers, transaction records, and drone flight paths. When they finally closed in, they arrested dozens, including inmates, outside dealers, and even some corrupt prison workers. AJC. But here's the thing. Even as the net tightened, the question remained, could these inmates really be stopped? For years, they had built something powerful and hidden behind prison walls. Could one big operation really break the chain? And that's where things got even shocking. In their final raid, officials uncovered evidence that the prisoners had been planning a major expansion of their network to not only drug trafficking, but financial fraud too. It suggested a criminal empire that didn't just survive inside prison, it was growing. What happens next? Did investigators manage to completely shut it down, or did the inmate leaders simply regroup and rebuild? Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. The prison was supposed to be locked down after the big raids. Officers walked the halls with tighter routines. The yards stayed closed longer, and surprise cell searches became the new normal. But even with all that, something didn't feel right. The investigators knew the inmates' network was too big, too organized, and too calm. It was almost like the leaders inside were waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. And then it happened.
One night, during a routine search in a high-security block, a guard opened an inmate's mattress. Instead of finding only sheets and foam, he found a hidden phone, still warm, still unlocked, and still active on a call. The call timer on the screen showed 27 minutes. Someone on the outside had been speaking to a man who was supposed to be cut off from the world. The guard froze. If this phone was active, that meant something bigger was happening. Something the raids hadn't stopped. Something the inmate leaders had been planning behind everyone's back. Before the guard could say a word, inmates across the block started yelling, banging on doors, creating chaos. It was too sudden, too loud, too perfectly timed. It felt like a distraction, like someone inside had warned them the phone was discovered. And that's exactly what investigators feared. The network was still alive, still informed, still reacting in real time. The prison went on emergency lockdown again. But the question burned a hole through every officer's mind. How did the inmates know? Who tipped them off? This wasn't just about phones or drugs anymore. It was about influence. These prisoners still had power, even in a place built to destroy it. When things eventually calmed down, investigators began piecing together what the inmate leaders had been quietly building. The raids had hit the drug operations hard, but the inmates had already started shifting into financial crimes. It was safer, easier to hide, and harder to trace back to a specific prison cell. They discovered that inmates were using outside helpers to run identity theft, unemployment fraud, and stolen check scams. These weren't small-time hits. Some of the groups were stealing thousands of dollars at a time, money that helped keep their prison operations alive. Commissary credits, payments to corrupt guards, cash routed to girlfriends and wives. Every dollar made them stronger. Investigators traced one scheme back to a man serving a long sentence who had somehow gained access to dozens of social security numbers. He didn't have a computer, didn't have the internet, didn't have the freedom to walk anywhere, but he had a plan, and people outside were following his orders like he was still the boss of a real company. Meanwhile, daily life inside the prison remained harsh and dangerous. Fights broke out over the smallest things: food, phone time, or rumors about who might be talking to authorities. Inmates walked with their backs to the wall. Everyone knew that one wrong move could get them hurt. Yet somehow, the gang leaders still managed to stay organized.
They operated through coded notes called kites, using letters to hide instructions. Some messages were written using the first letter of each word. Others were buried inside drawings, folded into tiny squares and passed from cell to cell. Guards tried their best to stop it, but the prison was a living machine. Information moved because inmates made it move. Even the calmest days could change in a heartbeat. One afternoon, a group of inmates got into a fight near the showers. Officers rushed in. Bodies crashed against the walls. Shouts echoed through the concrete hall. At first, it looked like another regular fight, but the next day, investigators discovered something chilling. One of the inmates involved was a messenger for the main gang leader. He wasn't fighting over a personal issue. He was fighting because he was being punished. Someone inside the network believed he had been too slow delivering orders, and the fight was a warning to everyone else. That meant the gang was strong enough not only to run crime outside the prison, but also to police its own members inside it. Despite all the chaos, the inmate leaders kept building their newest plan, expanding their financial operations into multiple states. They used girlfriends, brothers, and friends on the outside. They used stolen driver's licenses and fake phone numbers. They spread money across different banks to avoid raising suspicion. Everything was moving smoothly, until the investigators made a discovery that changed everything. While searching another cell, an officer found a handwritten list taped under a metal bunk. It contained names, not inmate names, staff names, officers, one by one. Some were marked with stars, some were underlined, some had coded notes next to them. No one knew exactly what the list meant, but every officer understood what it could mean. A hit list? A bribery list? A list of guards already helping the gang? Whatever it was, the prison was now on edge. Officers didn't know who they could trust. Inmates whispered through the halls. The air turned heavy, tense, dangerous.
And just when investigators thought things couldn't get worse, something happened that shook the entire prison system. A new message came into the tip line, anonymous, shaky, almost frightened. It said one sentence: "You haven't stopped them. They're planning something big." The story gets even darker from here. The warning hit the investigators like cold water. They're planning something big. It didn't say what, or when, or who was involved, but it was enough to push the entire prison system into full alert. Officers were doubled on each shift. Cell searches increased to 3 times a day. Every inmate phone call was checked twice. But even with all of that, the investigators knew the truth. The prison leaders had always been one step ahead. And now, whatever they were planning was already in motion. The breaking point came early one morning, just before sunrise. A guard doing a round at the back of the prison noticed something strange near the fence line. Small pieces of plastic scattered in the grass. At first he thought it was trash, but then he found a small motor, then a battery, then a camera lens. His heart sank. It wasn't trash. It was the broken remains of a drone. Someone had tried another drop, and that meant the inmates were gearing up for something that required new tools, phones, blades, drugs, or all of them at once. Whatever the plan was, it had a deadline, and they were racing toward it. Inside, tension climbed fast. Inmates were whispering more. The gang leaders stayed quiet, too quiet. They didn't argue, didn't move around, didn't make noise. Silence from dangerous men was never a good sign. Investigators began pulling footage from every security camera they had. That's when they saw something almost unbelievable. At 3:11 a.m., hours before the broken drone was found, 3 inmates had synchronized movements from inside their cells. They stood up, sat down, moved to the wall, stepped back, all at the exact same time. It wasn't random. It was a signal, a message, a countdown. Officers rushed to isolate the men. Their cells were torn apart looking for phones, notes, anything, but nothing turned up, not even a scrap of paper. It was like the inmates had communicated without leaving any trace at all. That scared the investigators more than the drone, because it meant the network was evolving again. The gang leaders weren't giving up power. They were shifting, adapting, shrinking their operations so they could move quietly. The more pressure the prison system put on them, the smarter they became. And now, they were close to something big enough that they didn't want anyone to hear a single word about it. While the prison scrambled to figure out the plan, something unexpected happened that finally broke the case open. A young inmate, 19 years old, small, scared, serving time for a low-level drug charge, asked to speak to an officer privately. He was shaking so badly he could hardly hold the cup of water they gave him. When he finally managed to speak, he revealed something investigators had never imagined. The gang leaders weren't just planning another drop. They were planning a takeover. Not of the prison, of the outside crime network. The raids had broken some of their old connections. Money had gone missing. Some outside helpers had been arrested or had cut ties. But instead of shrinking, the leaders inside wanted to rebuild, bigger than before. They wanted to take over the entire pipeline of drug deliveries entering the prison, every financial scam linked to their groups, and every outside runner who worked for them. They weren't planning violence, they were planning control.
And they were using drones, coded messages, and bribed staff to do it. The inmate revealed the final piece. Within the next 2 weeks, the leaders planned to use new phones, a new outside courier, and a new set of mules inside the prison to restart everything under their full command. They even had backup leaders in other prisons ready to keep the chain going if someone got caught. It was a full empire blueprint, and it was nearly complete. The investigators moved fast. Over the next days, they launched round-the-clock surveillance, removed staff suspected of helping the ring, and transferred key inmate leaders into isolation units with zero contact. For the first time in years, the prison fell completely silent. No coded messages, no movement, no drone flights. Just a long, tense quiet. Finally, after weeks of work, the investigators made a public announcement. The network had been dismantled. Phones were seized, outside contacts were arrested, inmates were moved. The prison system had finally won. But inside the maximum security block, one officer noticed something on a wall during a routine check. It was a tiny scratch mark, just a single line carved into the paint. Beneath it, another line, and a third. A pattern, a countdown. The officer stared at it, unsure whether it was old or new, but he felt a chill run down his spine. Because in maximum security, nothing is meaningless, and every mark could be a message. A reminder that even when the prison walls are strong, some criminals don't stop. They only wait.